of the COVID-19 pandemic on the tourism and event sectors. Please ensure that mobile phones are switched to silent and that any background noise is minimised. I wish to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, and I pay my respect to the elders past, present and emerging. I wish to welcome any members of the public that are watching via the live broadcast. My name's Em Veredigan and I'm chair of the committee, and also I'd like to introduce fellow committee members that are present here online with us today. Mr. Mark Jebb, Mr. Rod Barton, Ms. Wendy Lovell, Mr. Andy Medic, and I'm Mr. Lee Talamas. That's who's appearing on my screen today. If there's anybody I've missed out, please let me know. I'd like to call our first witness, Catherine McKenzie, the CEO of Echuca Moama Tourism. And I'd like to just state all evidence taken at this hearing is protected by parliamentary privilege as provided by the Constitution Act 1975 and further subject to provisions of the Legislative Council standing orders. Therefore, the information you provide during this hearing is protected by law. However, any comment prepared outside the hearing may not be protected. Any deliberately false evidence or misleading of the committee may be considered a contempt of Parliament. All evidence is being recorded. You'll be provided for a proof version of the transcript following the hearing. Transcripts will ultimately be made public and posted on the committee's website. We welcome your opening comments, but ask they be kept to a maximum of 5 to 10 minutes, and that we have plenty of time for discussion. Could you please start by stating your name for the Hansard and then begin your presentation? Over to you, Catherine.
Catherine McKenzie. Thank you. First of all, I'd really welcome the opportunity to address this inquiry on behalf of over 250 tourism businesses from across the Echuca Moama region. Echuca Moama and District Tourism Association is the peak tourism body for the region, and it spans both the Victorian and New South Wales side of this wonderful iconic Murray River. Echuca Moama is the closest point to Melbourne on the Murray and is a pleasant 2.5 hours drive from Melbourne. The region pre-COVID-19 was experiencing record visitation with 797,000 overnight visitors and visitors spending a record 2.4 million visitor nights in the region and 770,000 domestic day trip visitors. These visitors, as at March 2020, were spending 482 million in the region, or more simply put, contributed $1.3 million per day to the local economy. And we're a small destination of, with the two towns together, just on 23,000 people. It would be fair to say in March 2020, Echuca Moama was a thriving visitor economy, with tourism being one of the major economic drivers for the region. However, with the onset of the pandemic in March, this thriving tourism destination came to a standstill. Over the longer term, with our lockdowns, border closures, further state lockdowns and river closures, this visitor economy is being decimated. In fact, Echuca Moama region has been one of the hardest hit regions in Australia, with last year 41 weeks out of 52 weeks of closure from March 2020 to March 2021. It's been devastating to say the least. Living in a border community during this time has not been easy. And again, in 2021, we find ourselves back in this lockdown territory with no JobKeeper or support net for tourism operators. Melbourne is the key source market for Echuca Moama, accounting for 66% of the region's visitors. And so any Victorian lockdown has enormous impact, not only on the Victorian side of the river, but on the New South Wales. We operate as one town and one destination. Last year, post the border closures and lockdowns, our regional tourism body, Murray Regional Tourism, surveyed tourism businesses along the Murray and found that the impacts on the accommodation sector were immense. The report found that in winter 2020, with the borders closed, an average size motel, around about 20 rooms, lost between 20 and 30,000 a month, And in January 2021, with the Victorian border closing, the same size motel estimated its losses to be between 120 to 150,000 for that month. It was peak season. Similarly, Echuca Moama has a wonderful array of beautiful caravan parks along the river, and the losses for them over the winter were around about 20 to 50,000 per month for those mid-range caravan parks, and January anywhere between 350 to 500,000 for that month. Larger caravan parks lost in the vicinity of 1.2 million for January. At this point in time, we find that operators have banked up debt, and with the loss of the JobKeeper, really there's no safety net. We know our Victorian businesses have had some level of support. However, our New South Wales businesses have not had the same level. While Easter and the school holiday period since February have been promising with excellent visitation, this in no way goes to ameliorate the underlying debt that exists across this once thriving Echuca Moama tourism region. Add to this, the region is now currently in circuit breaker, and once again, we're facing these uncertain times and uncertain conditions. What's been the impact on the broader tourism visitor economy over this time? I think, like many destinations across Victoria and Australia, we're experiencing a massive skill shortage, and that's happening across accommodation, retail and hospitality. It's happening basically in Accom. I saw recently where a number of operators leading into busy weekends couldn't let all their rooms because they didn't have the staff to service them. We're also seeing in our regional towns where our restaurants and cafes are closing early, not staying open late, and often closing a couple of days a week because they don't have the staff to keep their doors open. Just want to turn my attention to events. As we all know, events have been severely impacted with the onset of the pandemic and what's ensued over the last 12 months. Echuca Moama in 2021 lost its Riverboat Music Festival, an award-winning festival, the 2020 Winter Blues Festival in July, and we lost the June long weekend, the Steam Rally, and that will not take place again this year. We've lost many sporting events, including the Australian and international darts tournaments. These events were sensitively positioned across Echuca Moama to provide stimulus and attract major market segments during the quieter periods of the year, February and through our winter months. The loss of events has had massive impact for us over the period of time. I think just in closing my remarks at this stage, it's important to note that a thriving destination with the severe impacts we've had has left this region really concerned about where we are now, and really concerned about going into a winter which is a much softer period for us. I also want to say that our community is extremely resilient. Post the New Year Eve Victorian border closure, the community and business came together and formed a group called Let's Revive Echuca Moama. And to date, that's raised $85,000 to support the tourism sector to market into markets Melbourne to try and attract visitation over this winter. we certainly know that if we don't attract this visitation, we could lose many, many businesses across accommodation, retail and hospitality. So as I sit here, it feels quite bleak, not knowing what the government announcement is going to be today, and really feeling for our businesses and really thinking about what the journey ahead is for winter. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, for that and sharing your local insight into the impact of COVID-19 on the tourism and event sectors in Echuca, Moama. Thank you very much. It's very insightful. What I might do now is give an opportunity to committee members to ask a question. I do notice that Mrs. MacArthur and Dr. Cumming have also joined us, and now we have 8 committee members and participating members online. And due to time constraints, I might ask all committee members to ask one question, and if we get an opportunity to ask a second. So we'll start in the order of Mr. Barton, Miss Lovell, then Mr. Jepp, and then we'll go through the list. I'm just looking at what's on my screen. So Mr. Barton, you can have the first question, then Miss Lovell, then Mr. Jepp. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Catherine. Catherine, I've been visiting and holidaying in Echuca for the last 40 years. I was a resident of Stanhope. So I'm very familiar of the battle that you're facing at the moment, which is widespread across all of Victoria and rural and regional Victoria. But what I'm just interested to see how things are panning out. There's pockets of recovery. We take out what's happened in this last week. But prior to that, for instance, when we went to Bright, there was huge visitation and all that sort of stuff. Were you seeing that same level of
lift? We have had, as you know, Echuca Moama is a very good, thriving tourism destination and much loved. And we have seen good visitation. I suppose the point I was making is that we really need that to continue with the underlying debt structure that we've got sitting across most of our businesses now, with the losses they've incurred over those 41 weeks, and then we've had 2 circuit breakers and we're currently in that second one. So winters traditionally a much softer period, and that's why we put our events into the winter period or into February when everybody goes back to school. So the events have been really well positioned, even with the big international darts event that went into August, so that we had people visiting, and we were actually trying to build that visitation in that winter month. So I think while we've had some really good visitation and some really good cash flow, it's not going to sustain us with the losses we've had over the past 12 months and through this winter period.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Miss Lovell.
Sorry, I always forget to unmute myself. Catherine, thank you for your presentation, which was extremely informative. Our communities here on the border are a unique situation and were much harder hit last year, as you said. I spoke to the motel owners who were in tears because they still had their leases to pay, etc., that were not forgiven. And, I spoke to the hospitality providers who'd prepared for a long weekend in over New Year, and then again in for the Valentine's weekend that were closed down at the very last minute. And I understand the impact that had on your community. The uncertainty around these sudden lockdowns, what do you think that does to the confidence of the whole sector in the region and the events sector to actually gear up and plan again for a long weekend, only a couple of weeks away now, and for other events? I mean, the Winter Blues Festival's coming up in July. What would be the cost to the community if that was cancelled at the last minute?
The cost is immense. The phones have been running hot over the last couple of days, with the industry fearful that we won't have the Queen's Birthday weekend visitation. As soon as the lockdown was called, the circuit breaker was called, even before that, operators were having cancellations, and cancellations have already started into the long weekend. People just not wanting to travel, and that's understandable. But I think what our industry is really asking for a border community is that we know the levers for lockdowns from both sides of the river, from both governments, so that we can plan better. I think it's this stop and start where lockdowns are called very quickly, and we understand possibly why, but we just want some better certainty around that. And I think our visitors want better certainty too, so they know what the levers are. Through this, we've got a plan. We've still got to run businesses. And if we just had some better levers and certainties around what's entailed, and we can see those being put in place, then our businesses can plan. We've had a resilience study done over this period of time, and we are looking to put in destination-wise some better strategies, but it is this stop and start, and really it does a lot to the mental health of our accommodation and hospitality retail, that they really don't, that uncertainty brings that sort of stress, and of course the loss of income, which is devastating.
So do you think that the state needs to provide more financial assistance to the operators when they close down for these lockdowns like this? And also the vouchers for travel, they expired last Monday. Do you think following this lockdown that they should be reinstated to restore confidence and get people back into the regional communities for travelling?
Yeah, two elements there. Confidence is shot with the southern border. It's with the southern circuit breakers and, dare I say, border closures. So yes, and secondly, we do need more demand driving initiatives like the voucher system, especially for areas like us over winter where we're not a snow destination, where it's a much softer destination. And even for our events during this time, if they can run, they've got smaller numbers. They're working under huge restrictions. So our operators were saying, even with the welcome support from the Victorian government in the last week, $2,500 doesn't go anywhere to food wastage, to cancellations on properties. It's helpful, but it doesn't solve anything for them personally in their businesses.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Catherine. I might pass over to Mr. Jebb, and also Mr. Jebb can also ask a question on my behalf as well. So I'll waive my right to question also.
No, I think with 8 people, I'll just ask one question. I won't go into it. Thanks, Catherine, for being with us today. And I think, like everybody, we're all frequent visitors to Echuca. It's a beautiful place in northern Victoria. I was very interested in when you were talking about the certainty, and of course, reminded that last week one of the cases that was uncovered was in Kahuna, just up the road. And I'm in Bendigo.
It wasn't a case; it was just an exposure.
I'm just
no cases in Kahuna.
Thanks for the correction. So there was a hot spot identified in Kahuna, as well as Bendigo, and we've since heard that also down the corridor of the Hume Highway that there's always also been some designated spots. So that makes that issue of certainty a little bit tricky, doesn't it? With if suddenly these places pop up, and so I'm really trying to understand, in that sort of environment where it's so fluid, precisely what it is that you're looking for when you talk about certainty.
I think what and I suppose it's been around circuit breakers, but also lockdowns on borders. We experienced 38 weeks from New South Wales, and then the New Year's Eve lockdown that came in with moments of, only hours of warning. We lost over 35,000 people from this region with people. It was chaos. And I think businesses are saying that they need to have some sort of warning mechanism so that they can actually manage their business. So the lockdowns seem to be so quick, and we realised that as various areas are seen as hotspots. But just having some sort of from government levers to say that we're going to lock down, that New Year's situation where we only had hours. There were people on the river, they didn't even know that they were being asked to leave the place, and got in at 8 o'clock at night, and their wife had packed up the vans. They'd been out celebrating New Year. It was very serious for us. And I think the devastation of going from that period of absolutely full occupancy to nobody within sort of 6 hours, and the chaos on the road. Our industry is just calling for government to be more thoughtful about how it does lock down and giving warning. And I think the government, Victorian government's been good this time. They've given some, come very quickly to give a level of support, realising there's no JobKeeper or no safety net now for all our businesses there. So, Mark, I think it is just really trying to make sure that we're given due process as opposed to just hours like New Year.
Okay, well, I will ask a follow-up, Chair, just based on that. And you mentioned the business support and the lack of JobKeeper. I mean, their federal government, the Victorian government's stepped up with a package, and
right.
We've asked the federal government to also make a contribution, but they've declined to do so. You talked in your opening presentation about a lot of the caravan parks, and of course we know that. But you've talked about Echuca, Moama being a border town, and the state border is not something that the local community sees. It's just part of one community. But most of those businesses are on the other side of the river. Are you aware of what support the New South Wales government have been providing to those businesses during this, particularly when they put in place their own lockdown and border closure?
Yeah, the level of support across the river hasn't been anywhere near what the Victorian government has provided. I think one of the challenges for New South Wales has been that they were receiving regionally very good visitation across New South Wales, and it was really only the border communities that were being impacted by the border closure per se. And so our New South Wales operators have had very little support. And I think I put in my paper to the Legislative Council that there were lots of issues with ABNs. If they had a Victorian accountant, often they were seen as not being a New South Wales business. The eligibility was very tough, and a lot didn't qualify. So it's been really hard. Many of our businesses on the New South Wales side of the river are very large caravan parks and establishments, our clubs, and they've been hugely impacted by the loss of the Victorian market, because we are really a Victorian destination. And even though locals see themselves as one destination, we do know that visitors cross that border without even realising they were going into New South Wales sometimes, and then were locked down with the border closures and couldn't get back. So it's been a tough time all round, and I do think that our New South Wales operators have really suffered greatly, and even visitation-wise, haven't been able to go across. Visitors couldn't get across the border, but we could have some visitation on the Victorian side, even if it wasn't what we normally expected. There was a little bit when the regions opened up. So it has been patchy, but I think the New South Wales businesses have really suffered through this 12 months.
Thank you. I might just remind committee members, because there's 9 of us now online, we might not get an opportunity to all ask a question, but if you don't get a question this time, I'll make sure you get prioritised for the next witness. So I'll get to Mr. Medic and Ms. McArthur, who have been patiently waiting, if they have a question. No, Mr. Medic.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Catherine. And I was just listening then to your reply to Mr. Jepp's question, and I think you've thrown up a really important point there in that, you know, there has been support from the Victorian side, but very little support for that, you know, because as he rightly points out, you know, these communities, these cross-border communities, see each other as one and the same. They don't recognise a state border very much, particularly in a business sense, and I agree with that completely. But this lack of support that you're pointing out from the New South Wales government for those people, it affects both sides. So with that in mind, do you feel that perhaps that, you know, there should be a national approach to this, rather than individual states having to do what they can do and provide the packages that they're providing or refusing to provide in that instance? Do you think the federal government is abrogating its own responsibilities and should actually accept some of the responsibility that they have, an economic responsibility to look after these border communities a bit more?
I think from our point of view, we just want a coherent approach that looks after our businesses. Echuca Moama was and is an absolutely thriving tourism destination, and through no fault of anyone's, we find ourselves in these situations. And our hope would be that governments would work together to make sure that through this time, tourism has been one of the most affected industries, that there is a coordinated approach that really focuses on the health of tourism and the many businesses that are involved. As I said in my opening address, Echuca Moama Tourism is an industry-led body with over 250 operators in this small town. And what our request is to all levels of government to work together to support these really good businesses in good times, and really through no fault of their own have ended up with losing. Many of them have lost their retirement funds. They were looking to retire, and now they're back to, some of them have told me it will be another 5 to 7 years before they could even look to getting out of their businesses. So it's really impacted border regions. So I think really, and we just want some coherence and some coordination from all levels of government and focus on key issues to address the problem at hand.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mrs. McArthur.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Catherine. Now, we've heard from the government apologists, Mr. Jepp and Mr. Medic, on this matter. The bottom line here is that we don't need to have these lockdowns. We don't need to have these border closures. You should be up
Dr.
and running.
Dr. McArthur's at it again.
You should be up and running as normal. The only reason for a lockdown statewide should be that the hospital system can't cope. At the moment, we've got one person in hospital as far as we're told. Now, you need to be working as a viable operation in Echuca Moama, and New South Wales have managed not to lock down the whole state, and they've kept the economy going. In Victoria, we seem to have shut down the whole state. So wouldn't you agree that the most help a government could give, a state government could give, is to end the lockdown end the border closures and let you get on with working as you have done so successfully in the past.
Oh, it's a really, there's a real social license around our roles in tourism. And I've worked in tourism for many, many years now. And one of the things that we have to be totally aware of in small towns and regions like this is the nervousness of our local community, fearing that COVID will be brought here, especially from Melbourne and other parts of the state. And so we work this fine balance of what is appropriate in terms of travel, but I've had many local residents call me just making sure that, and very, very concerned that if we open, we're open during these really infectious times with the virus spreading, that it might end up and devastate small communities like this. So there's so many tensions and balances in destinations like this. But if at all possible, and the Victorian government did do it during last year, where they did open the regions and we did open the border bubble so we could travel. And I think our industry is certainly looking, whatever happens going forward, if there is lockdown, that the border bubble will exist so we can get some visitation. And I must say our local community, not only raising funds for us to market, but supporting our local industries has been just absolutely over and above and amazing. So it is that checks and balances, and I think it's really good planning, it's good decision making, and it's trying to keep small and regional communities safe, but at the same time make sure that we can, where we can, open them up, whether it's a border bubble or whether it's parts of regional Victoria, that we can actually get our visitors to come and enjoy this wonderful destination.
Thank you.
Well, the government's had 15 months to get this right.
You,
You'd think they could have got it right.
Ms. McCarthy, thank you for that. I just want to remind committee members, can we please limit preambles, because there's 9 of us now online. We have very short time space, and for the rest of the day as well. I want to stay on schedule, but we're already going over. Our next witnesses are already here. But if Dr. Cumming, Mr. Davis, has one short question, Dr. Cumming, you can ask that now if you wish to.
Thank you. I was just going to say to Catherine that Tim Quilty and Tanya Maxwell, the minor parties in the upper house, have actually brought to the Parliament's attention virtually all of your concerns in border communities. And I'll just leave it as that as a comment, but I agree with you 100%. The government should look at the regions and the border communities very differently and actually have a bit of a reflection on what New South Wales is doing, and we should have a national approach.
Thank you, Dr. Cumming, for that contribution. Mr. Davis, one short question, if you wish to do so. We can't hear you, Mr. Davis.
Maybe we should go to the next guest, Chair.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Mr. Davis. You're the last committee member that has a question, so if you can, otherwise we'll have to move to next witnesses. We'll keep that on notice, Mr. Davis. I'm sure, Catherine, are you okay, would it be okay if the committee was to ask you any further questions we may have, and if we emailed you after this hearing?
Sure.
Fantastic. On that note, our next witnesses are already ready, so the committee will take a very short break before getting our next witness. On behalf of the committee, we wish to thank you for your full and frank discussion with the committee.